Okay, round two. We have the Sovereign. Finally, you decided not to bitch out.
I mean, you're gonna start off like that. That last guy that was in here was so fucking bad. I think everybody is glad to just be fucking done with him. So let's not start off on the bad foot. Um, so I don't know how much you know about what the topic was or how it came up or
Yes, I
whatever.
do. I know everything about it.
So just to start, do you want a foundation? Like, are you saying that you?
Okay, here's how this started, chat. As far as I remember it, this guy said that socialism in one country is a form of revisionism in regards to Marx and Engels' conception of socialism.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. That's it. So your argument is that it's not, right?
It's not correct.
Okay. Cool. I'm good with that. All right. So just foundationally, let's discuss a couple things so that we can make sure that we're on the same page. If you're cool with that.
Okay.
Um, So your understanding of Marx's conception of communism or socialism, do you agree that what he said was that worldwide revolution is something that's necessary and inevitable to establish communism?
Correct.
Okay, and you also agree that he was concerned about the disappearing of borders, increased globalization. He felt like without worldwide revolution or what he called united action of the workers, that the capitalist proletariat in these Western imperialist states would eventually be too far gone to free themselves.
He didn't say that.
Okay, I mean we don't have to agree on that. That's
No,
personal.
I would like some references about Too Far Gone.
Okay, I can. I don't have a bunch of shit in front of me. This is off the top of my head, so I.
Okay.
Okay, so okay, we could skip that one then. So do you agree then that Marx talked about revolution being constant action until the elimination of capitalism and the abolition of classes,
You said
and not a
constant action?
yeah, he talked about it as a constant action. That's a quote that he used.
Okay.
Okay, and that it was not
Can you
supposed to
raise
be.
your volume?
Yeah, yeah. Hold on.
Hello?
Yeah, yeah. Hold on. I'm working on it.
Do you have
No,
a cam?
not on this computer now.
Okay,
This
go
is as
on.
high as it goes in Discord, man. If you want, you can change my volume individually for you, and then pick up better if you right click on my name.
Okay, let's continue.
All right, man. So then the next part of that conversation would be that Marx also did not view this revolution, this constant action of revolution, as a simultaneous event. So that Trotsky take is wrong, right?
Correct.
Okay. And can we agree then that foundationally, the concept of socialism in one country, it refers to the formal policy that deprioritized international revolution on the agenda of the Soviet political scope and then asserted as the primary priority the task of internal development.
I contest the meaningfulness of that statement.
Okay. So I guess we can talk about that for a little bit. So, socialism in one country, the arguments that were had in the 1920s were essentially about what direction Soviet policy was going to take, right? So, what their main focus was going to be on, and whether or not they were going to continue to try to support some of these transnational proletarian revolutions. Is that a better
No,
explanation?
that's inaccurate historically.
How would you put it?
By the time the arguments took place, and they weren't really arguments, rather there was a united party and a left opposition, actually, of wreckers who were trying to change the course of the party.
I get it, man. Everybody hates Trotsky.
By the 1920s, the question of transnational revolutions was completely over. The notion that the workers were going to uprise in the Western countries was not entertained by anyone at that point.
I would say that up until Lenin's death, he still held out some hope about Germany specifically,
No,
and that he was
no,
he was viewed.
no.
Hmm?
Well before Lenin's death, by years before Lenin's death,
Are you talking
no
about
one. Sorry?
You're talking about like Kautsky's view of it in like the 1910s?
No, I am telling you that in the 1920s, before Lenin's death,
Hmm.
the German Revolution failed.
Yeah, I understand that, but what I'm
And they
talking about,
recognized that this was not an avenue to save the Soviet Union.
Right, but still, socialism in one country. The point of contention here is apparently that socialism in one country is not a reprioritization of um,
I told you I contest
internal
the
development.
meaningfulness of that statement. And the reason I contest the meaningfulness of that statement is because for you to say that socialism in one country deprioritized international revolution means that international revolution could have meaningfully been a priority of the Soviet government, but it couldn't have been. What could they have done to make international revolution a priority in the first place? The choice wasn't there.
So you don't think that there were still any budding like socialist revolutions happening in any of the Eastern European countries,
There
or
weren't. By the 1920s, there were none.
okay? So
And by
we
the way, even the ones that did happen before the 20s were clearly not popular revolutions. The Hungarian Revolution was crushed with ease. The rest of them were crushed with ease. The Soviet Union could do nothing to spread revolution by that time. And
you don't
even
think
when it seemed like some revolutions were happening, those turned out to be completely different than what the Bolsheviks, who were hyping them up, thought they were going to be.
right? But you don't think that they could have sent any level of resources, or with all the militarization that they were doing for the next few years, that they couldn't have put more of a focus on transnational proletarian revolution?
No, they couldn't. The Soviet Union wasn't even in a position to defend itself from foreign attacks. How could it have mobilized its fucking war machine to overthrow the governments to the West when it couldn't even defend itself against these powers? It had to sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk to save itself. And
Why?
it was also in the aftermath of just having fought a civil war.
Why
Trotsky's
won't
westward push into Poland completely fucking failed. And I'm glad it failed, because if it didn't fail, they would have had much more problems on their plate if they ever caught up to Germany. The revolution would have been crushed in its cradle.
that is an interpretation. I think that it's a hypothetical about whether or not they would be able to
Well,
allocate
this is
resources.
the debate, so let's debate about it.
That's not the debate. The debate is whether or not it's a revisionism of Engels and Marx. So we
Okay.
don't even have to necessarily agree on socialism in one country, right? About how it worked pragmatically.
Okay.
Okay. So back to Marx, since that's the focus of this conversation. Marx spoke pretty explicitly about the idea of one socialism in one state, mostly within the context of France after the
Did
French
Marx
Revolution.
give a temporal time frame for this?
Well, nobody gave a temporal time frame. In
No,
fact,
he didn't.
one of the main things that was a point of contention with the debates in the 1920s about Lenin's position on it was whether or not he was viewing socialism in one state as a transient, like a transient form of state, or whether or not it was intended to be like a permanent fixture of communism, and whether or not it's supposed to be like
Who
a
thought
permanent.
who believed that there was going to that any given conditions of the Soviet government and Soviet state were permanent? Where did
Well,
Stalin say it was permanent?
I say permanent. Let's say long term, like as
Okay.
for the not eternal. Okay. So long term versus short
Okay,
term.
what does that have to do with if Marx did not specify a time frame? Why is Marx relevant to the question?
Because we're asking about whether or not it was
I know
revisionist Marx.
why would you
I'll
perceive
get to that.
why would you perceive a contradiction drawing from Marx if Marx never specified a time frame
Because
that
it's not about time
socialism,
frame.
which is ultimately global in its significance, the very insignia of the USSR and the Soviet state emblems was a fucking globe. So yeah, they were very clear about in their understanding that ultimately the victory of socialism and communism was going to be global. The question is how.
You don't think that? Okay, so I guess that's another point of contention that we're gonna, I guess, not agree on here, because
Well, let's debate about it.
my my reading of things that Stalin was saying at the time was that this was going to be a state that would exist in perpetuity. That
When did
there
he
was
say that?
This was during some of the 1924 to 1926.
Okay, do you have a reference that Stalin said this was going to be a state that lasts to the end of time?
Again, you're saying the end of time,
Yes.
which is kind of weird.
Are you aware of Stalin's actual arguments as to the ultimate victory of worldwide socialism and its relationship to socialism in one country? Do you have an ounce or smidgen of familiarity as to the question?
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, so if you want to just say what you
Sure,
mean.
I'll tell you what Stalin said. Stalin said that building socialism in one country is the path to global socialism because socialism will be spread by example. The victory of socialism in the USSR will send an example to the nations which actually comprise a majority of people in the world, as well as the developed capitalist countries, and that is through this means of acquiring global hegemony, not through direct force, direct coercion, or even through quote unquote spreading the revolution by sending aid and arms, but by example. This is how Stalin thought, in his view, the worldwide victory of socialism would be guaranteed.
So this is a bit of a diversion from whether or not it's a revisionism of Marx or Engels, but
How?
I do want to ask you this. How do you think
Explain.
that worked out?
How do I think what?
How do you think that worked out, Stalin's plan?
It isn't over.
Okay. Do you view current Russia as a communist or socialist
No,
system?
communists lost power in Russia.
Right. And that was because of external influences from the West, which the entire point of socialism.
Can you
in
shut the
one country
fuck up and stop
was-
putting words in my fucking mouth? When did I talk about the West? Do you
did.
want to talk about the causes of the Soviet Union's collapse, or do you want to just acknowledge the fact that Stalin's writings and theories have living continuity in modern day China?
Yes, living continuity. Right. So living continuity is sort of one of the principal things in discussing whether or not something is revisionist or not. So you can look at Marxism as dogmatic, or you can look at it as creative Marxism. This is a literal Stalin quote in the Sixth Congress, where he was talking about you have dogmatic Marxism and you have creative Marxism.
Do you
and
think
I
creative Marxism
right?
implies revisionism? Do you know what revisionism is?
Yeah, I do know what revisionism is.
You know what
It's
revisionism is. Revisionism means that the essence of Marxism is being revived. But according to dialectical materialism, in order for the essence of a form, or the real essential content of a form to actually persist and survive, the form must undergo changes and transform. That is not the same as revisionism, which cancels out and completely changes the essence.
I guess that's where we would come to a fucking wall there.
I don't fucking think we should come to a wall. I think you should man up and fucking debate about it, because you gave Alex such a fucking hard time with your keyboard warrior walls of fucking text. Why don't you actually respond to what I just told you right now? This is perfectly consistent with the dialectic view.
We just fundamentally don't agree on the definition.
Why don't we agree? Do you want to debate about why we don't agree? I don't care what you agree or not agree with. I care about the arguments you're willing to forward to offer as a point of contention we can fucking debate about.
So when Marx and Engels wrote in Principles of Communism, or Section 2 of the Manifesto, whichever you want to look at here, they specifically posed this in a question and answer form, right? Say, is it possible to have socialism in one country alone? They said no. By creating the world market, big industry has already brought all the peoples of the earth, and especially civilized people, into such close relation with one another that none is independent of what happens to the others, right?
That is 100% reconcilable with the reality of socialism in one country. Because socialism in one country does not state that socialism is ultimately possible to achieve in one country. It just calls into question the prevailing assumptions about how that would work.
I think that we have a fundamental difference.
I know we have a fundamental fucking disagreement. You want to get to the actual content of our disagreement and debate about it? Because I don't care that you disagree with me. I care about why you disagree with me. Stop repeating that phrase.
We're interpreting Stalin completely differently.
Okay, justify your interpretation compared to mine.
The entire thing that Stalin was arguing for in 24 through 26 was the idea of this isolationist autarky economic system. It's the same thing that you have.
Sure. What does that have to do with the claim about the ultimate victory of socialism being global and international in nature?
Well, that's the thing too. Stalin himself was contradicting himself on this. So
Stalin revised Stalin. Stalin was revisionist to Stalin himself.
Stalin revised Stalin, and Stalin is pulling from Lenin, and Lenin is pulling from Marx.
So maybe the issue is that you just don't understand the dialectic method that underpinned Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin. Maybe it's not that they're revising themselves constantly. Maybe it's just that you're making assumptions that they're holding a dogmatic, undialectical view of reality. You ever thought about that?
I have thought about that, and that's exactly the conversation. So here's the thing, too. I'm not saying that it being revisionist is necessarily a negative thing. Lenin was revisionist. Lenin revised himself from 1915 through 1922.
Lenin was not a revisionist, unless you want to redefine what the term revisionist means in context. When Lenin levied the charge of revisionism against Kautsky, he wasn't just saying that Kautsky reinvented the form of Marxism or made new insights and contributions to Marxism. According to Lenin, people like Bernstein and Kautsky fundamentally revised the essence of Marxism.
Right, I agree with that. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Lenin changing his mind on the topic of socialism in one country from the things that he was writing in 1915 through 1917 to the point where he was saying completely different shit in
Why
2020.
do you have to interpret it as in he changed his mind? Why can't you interpret it as in Lenin never entertained the possibility that he would come to entertain toward the end of his life, which is what if the fundamental prerequisites of civilization can be built in a non-Western manner, which is almost ad verbatim what he said. It's not that he revised or changed his mind, it's that he came across a possibility that he before didn't entertain. It wasn't within the scope of what he considered possible. It is true that the Bolsheviks believed that the October Revolution ultimately hinged on the victory of the revolutions that were going to happen in Europe. That's true. But in no way can that assumption be justified as essential to Marxism or even Leninism. As Stalin himself will argue, Leninism itself, Lenin's contribution itself, ultimately is drawn out through socialism in one country. In other words, Lenin's contribution to Marxism goes very deep, and it goes deeper than what was previously expected or imagined. What Lenin did when he broke with the Second Internationale, he himself did not understand the full implications.
So that argument is the same one that Stalin made and that Lev Kamenev actually contextualized, because Lenin was trying to spin the stuff that, or rather, Stalin was trying to spin the stuff that Lenin was talking about earlier in his life as ultimately leading to this idea of socialism in one country. But
Yes.
the difference is that when Lenin was talking about that in that time period, he was talking about developed nations that he considered ripe for socialism, and he said multiple times that Russia was
Do you
not one of
not
those, and
see
it
how
still needed
socialism
significant
in one
development.
country is a logical conclusion of Lenin's original distinctive insight in the founding of the Bolshevik Party?
I'm sorry, I was talking. Did you ask me if I do not see it?
Yes, do you not see the continuity?
If you want to explain that to me, I'd be happy to hear it.
I'll explain it.
Okay.
So the very basis of Lenin's distinct view in Russia, contrasting with the rest of the Marxists, was that Lenin believed that the democratic revolution is a necessary and essential factor to the proletarian revolution, the bourgeois democratic revolution. But Lenin changed the logic. For Lenin, this was not a linear progress of time, which is going to be that the big bourgeoisie is going to overthrow, then it's going to be us next. Lenin rather said that the democratic bourgeois revolution is going to have its basis in the class distinctions that were popping up from below in the countryside, and that in the cities that were more developed, where the big bourgeoisie actually prevailed, you are not going to find a basis of the democratic revolution. So for Lenin, the democratic and the proletarian revolution were going to be co-temporal in an alliance between the democratic petty bourgeoisie in the countryside and the proletariat within the cities and in the countryside as well.
You're
So
talking about the 1915 stuff, yeah?
I'm talking about the very earliest writings of Lenin, the development of capitalism in Russia.
Right. Okay.
So,
So yeah, go ahead.
so it logically follows that from this very same logic, the revolution is not going to emerge or even depend upon the advanced capitalist countries. It's going to come from the global countryside, which is the semi-capitalist and uneven developed, and the colonies and all of this kind of stuff.
Right.
This is the logical conclusion of Lenin's original insight, which admittedly he and many others themselves did not originally grasp. The prejudice among the Bolsheviks that the revolution was going to depend on the European countries was a prejudice left over from social democracy in the era of social democracy. And by the way, if it's a revisionism of Marxism, you have to ask the question as to why Marx and Engels themselves came to eventually believe and reverse their original earlier prejudice that the revolution was going to happen first in the most advanced capitalist countries like England. By the end of their lives, Marx and Engels were on the same page that it was going to happen in Russia, not England, and that the English working class was the most unreliable working class in Europe as a whole.
So Engels died in what, 95?
Yes.
So in 94, he was still talking about how the Russian commune could only be used as a stepping stone to socialism under the pretense of Western European proletariat victory over the bourgeoisie. So I'm not sure where he.
Marx and Engels predict. Marx specifically said that the stage in which the commune could be used to leap to communism with skipping the stage of capitalism had passed, but he entertained the possibility first. But both Marx and Engels were on the same page that the revolution was first going to break out in Russia.
Right, but this is something that Engels is saying in the year before he died, and he's still making the same argument against this concept of socialism in one country.
He's not making it against the concept of socialism in one country, which was not even entertained or on the itinerary at that time. Engels still believed, yes, that a revolution of some kind, wasn't underway in Western Europe. And he believed a war was going to break out that was going to lead to the victory of the proletariat on the continent. Obviously, the war happened, but the proletariat did not prevail in Western Europe.
So the concept of the victorious proletariat lifting up the defeated proletariat just completely doesn't, like, how do you view that then? Because that's something that
It
not
doesn't end up happening. No.
right. It doesn't end up happening, but that
But
was
is
part of
this
their.
because uh, Engels was essentially wrong, or did he not draw the essence of his own dialectical materialist view to its furthest conclusion? Maybe
That,
Engels himself had prejudices that he carried over toward the end of his life, which he did. He obviously did. Both Marx and Engels had many prejudices that were not logical conclusions of their own brilliant insight that they carried to their grave. I'm sure they
I
had many prejudices about Europe and Europe's significance in comparison to the rest of the world. But the question is not about this or that views Marx and Engels had. The question about is what was essential to their discovery, to Marx and Engels' contribution to humanity, their discovery. What did Marx do that no one else did before? What did he discover that was never discovered before? That's the question. That is what makes or breaks revisionism. Not changing one's views according to different experiences and different developments. Actually, that is perfectly consistent with the epistemology that Marx himself made very clear as the philosophical foundations of Marx's own thinking. Marx himself did not have the exact same views about the world from cradle to the grave.
again, I think this is going to come down to whether or not, and again, we're kind of
Was
hitting this
Marx a
all.
revisionist about
I'm sorry.
himself? Because Marx did not retain the same views his whole life about every single thing in the world.
Right, I understand that. So when you're talking about Marx's writings, I think that you go with the most recent ideas that he had, if you're going to look at it from a dogmatic
Why?
point of view.
That's arbitrary. If he had lived longer, what conclusions would he have come to based on different developments? Do you
We
think
don't know.
Marx would have clung to those dogmatic views in the face of the new developments, or would he have gone down the path of Lenin? I think he would have gone down the path of Lenin so far as he remained faithful and consistent to his original essential insight.
Do you think he also would have supported the NEP?
Why not?
I'm literally asking. That's not a gotcha.
I think he would have.
Okay.
Lenin made it very clear. Of this, Marx and Engels have not said a word, which is true. Of these new
Right.
circumstances they found themselves in, Marx and Engels said nothing. They didn't give a blueprint or a guidebook. They couldn't have. These were new developments.
Why do you think the and again, this is not debating it. This is literally me asking you. Why do you think there was such a backlash against Kautsky raising these, or and even Vollmer before him in the context of Germany? They were both bringing up this idea of socialism in one country, sort of before it was called that. This idea of prioritizing internal development and turning inward. Uh, Kautsky, if I was reading him correctly, and it's been a minute, he was mostly talking about an interconnected series of socialist states that shared borders and still had trade between each other, but were mostly
What year
independent.
did he state this?
Kautsky, it's probably would have been like early 1900s.
And from whom did he get flack? Lenin was a disciple of Kautsky up until the First World War.
So Lenin, okay. So Lenin was specifically writing against this in 1915 and 1917.
Yes, because it was a form of opportunism, and clearly was a form of opportunism in relation to the war. It was Kautsky's excuse to basically justify the betrayal of the Second International in the face of the World War that was had emerged.
Right. Well, that's why I'm asking you, man. I'm not. That's not a part of the argument. Um, so the Trotsky argument here. Obviously, I'm not a trot. Um, and the debate that they had in the 1920s essentially focused around Lenin. But again, I'm still of the mind that it is a revisionism of what Marx and Engels wrote, because we can point specifically
But
to
you haven't made a single argument to justify that claim. So can we get to the arguments?
the argument is that they literally wrote it. We can go read it, and this is how they posited the idea of communism going
What
forward.
does that have to do with revisionism? Well, how do you define revisionism?
Revisionism is taking in any direction away from what the doctrine of the ideology is. So
So you're
when they
saying that
write,
anything Marx and Engels wrote, regardless of the context, was their doctrine.
so when they do the principles of communism, yeah, I think that's a doctrinal document.
But we already established that the principles of communism in no way contradict socialism in one country.
You established that I didn't agree with it.
But you didn't make a fucking argument in response. So can you make an argument this time instead of saying that this is your argument, even though I gave you a rebuttal, you gave me nothing in return?
The argument is that the
Where did
question
Marx and Engels specify a time frame?
again, you're focusing on time frames. I'm not.
No, you're implicitly assuming there's a time frame because Stalin did not think that socialism was going to only be in one country and wasn't ultimately going to be global for the very reasons stated in the principles of communism. Nowhere did Stalin disagree or contradict that. You're assuming he did because Stalin rejects the stupid view, which is a straw man of Marxism from day one, that the revolution, first of all, only implied the political overthrow of governments, and that second of all, this revolution was going to be simultaneous, which is an absurdity. Not even Marx and Engels thought it was going to be simultaneous.
Uh, Engels did say something about simultaneous, but I agree with
Please
your take
cite
on it.
it.
But it was in Die Deutsche Ideology. He said, empirically, communism is only possible as the act of ruling peoples at one stroke and simultaneously, which presupposes the universal development of productive forces.
Hold on.
The global economy, which goes along with that. But
Let's
again,
read the
I'm not a
exact
fucking trot.
citation. Let's read the
Hmm?
citation. Engels.
Are you
German
asking me
ideology.
about-
Can you give me a direct quote?
Yeah.
At one
Sorry,
stroke. Let me see if I can find it from that.
Yeah, empirically, communism is only possible as. You should be able to find it from that.
Okay. Empirically, communism is only possible as. We're going
And
to read
again,
the
this is a trot
context.
argument. This isn't even something I agree with, but since we want to talk about it.
Hold on. I'm looking for it. Hold on.
Yeah, you're good.
I can't find the source. Hold on. Okay, let's try
I guess empirically is probably not the best word to use there since it'll have multiple translations.
Okay, here we go. And this was Marx, not Engels, I believe. Development of productive forces. Empirically, communism is only possible as the act of the dominant peoples all at once. So, Marx is saying dominant peoples. What does he mean by dominant peoples? Are you aware?
So again, you're you're assuming that this is something that I agree with.
No,
This is
I'm not. I'm trying to demonstrate to you that Marx himself changed his view.
That's not really the point, is it?
Yes, it is the point. The point is, how can you say this is the essential doctrine of Marx and Engels when Marx himself changed his view? Marx did not think that communism is only possible as the act of the dominant peoples because Russians were not dominant peoples. And Marx came to appreciate the revolutionary significance of Russia toward the end of his life. He and Engels were simply ignorant about Russia. They didn't know anything about Russia. They only knew about Germany, and they made a lot of assumptions about Russia and about others, which in context they were correct within their polemics with fellow whatever, but ultimately they just didn't know about these other countries and their significance.
Well, I think that's part of why Lenin was changing his mind too toward the end of his life. He was in a
But
different
how
sort of
is that a
state.
revision of the how can that be part of the doctrine of Marxism when it's not what Marx viewed toward the end of his life? So Marx betrayed the doctrine of Marxism. Why do you get to decide what the doctrine of Marxism
Maybe
is
Marx
or
and I
isn't?
said Lenin, but I'm not
Sorry?
talking about Lenin there. I didn't say
Well, we're
Marx.
talking about Marx right now. Forget about Lenin. We're talking about Marx. Why are you saying that this is the doctrine of Marxism?
I don't understand your question. Can you reword it?
Why are you saying this is the doctrine of Marxism?
That's not a rewording. It's the same question.
Yeah, can you answer?
I don't understand in what context you're asking the question.
I asked you what is revisionism.
Right.
You said it is revising the fundamental doctrine of Marxism.
Right.
And you gave me an example of this contradiction, this revision, in the fact that Stalin's socialism in one country contradicts what was written in the German ideology, which was 1845, where Marx says empirically communism is only possible as the act of dominant peoples. Correct or incorrect?
Yeah, sure.
And for you,
Yeah,
this
I
is
don't know if that was Marx or Engels, but sure.
for you, this is an example of the doctrine of Marx.
For me, that is an example of them specifically saying at one point that
Yes.
socialism in one country is
And
not.
that's the doctrine of Marx. That Stalin is revising.
Yes.
No.
Marx never changed his mind on this. And like you
Yes,
said,
he fucking did. It's what I'm trying to tell you. He
do
did
you have a
change his
citation for
mind
that?
because he no longer believed that it's only possible as the act, quote unquote, of the dominant peoples. Moreover, he didn't believe it was all at once or simultaneous.
Okay. Do you have a citation on that
Yes,
anywhere?
I do. Read what Marx wrote about the Russian Revolution.
I mean, like a literal citation. Like,
Okay, let's look at the letters between Marx and Engels. We're going to have to dig through these. Marx, Engels, where Engels talks about all it's going to take is a prince. Let's see. Marxist.org. If someone in chat can speed this up, that would be great. But the guy wants a citation. And what happens when you get your citation?
then I'll concede the point.
Good.
Like, it's not I'm
Finally.
not an idiot.
Engels, Marx, what was the quote? Which it's where Engels says something like all it's going to take is a noble here or there, and then this is going to be where the revolution breaks out and it's going to spread to all of Europe.
All right, but he's still talking about spreading. Like, so I guess the other fundamental point of this is do you
want this citation or not? Because you're gonna have to shut the fuck up and help me find it.
I thought chat was looking for it for you, man.
I mean, you're gonna have to shut the fuck up and let me find it.
Okay.
So you deny that Marx appreciated the revolutionary significance of Russia toward the end of his life?
I think there's a difference between appreciating the revolutionary significance of it and saying that it in and of itself was a form of socialism, or that it was a victory of socialism.
Listen, we're not talking about that yet. What we're talking about is whether Marx clung to the view at the end of his life that communism is only possible as the act of the dominant peoples, of whom Russians were excluded.
Well, we know that Engels did because he said this in 1894.
But Engels included Russia. So do you not hear yourself right now? The Russians are not the dominant peoples, but Russia was pivotal and a key part of what Marx and Engels believed to be this European-wide revolution.
I guess it depends on your interpretation of whether or not there was ever a period where you could stop having the victorious proletariat mobilize the defeated proletariat.
What I don't understand what
And
you
this
just
is
said.
why we talked about constant action at the very beginning of this conversation.
Constant action is extremely vague and ambiguous. It can mean a billion fucking things.
Constant action in the context of Marxism was revolution as constant action until the elimination of capitalism and the abolition of classes. So when you have this communism or socialism as one country policy that turns completely inward and stops trying to spread ideology, I don't think that
How did it stop trying to spread ideology?
Excuse me?
You're making a bunch of fucking baseless assumptions, and I'm trying to pin you down on this one thing. Stop trying to move away from it.
No,
Marx and Engels changed their view of what you're saying is the essential, fundamental thing in Marxism. That's what I'm trying to hit you with right here, and you're trying to worm your way out of it.
not worming way out of shit. I'm still here. What are you talking about?
But you're avoiding the fucking topic.
I'm really not. I just don't know what to look up to help you.
Why are you saying this is the essence of Marxist doctrine when Marx and Engels themselves clearly did not stay true to this assumption?
And again,
the fact that they still, toward the end of their lives, considered the revolution in Europe to be necessary doesn't mean they still believed that it was only possible as the act of so-called dominant peoples all at once. Do you not get that?
You're still focusing on this all at once shit. I never said anything about simultaneous. That's Trotsky. That's Trotsky shit.
No, it's right here in the quote, all at once and simultaneously, which presupposes the universal development of the productive forces and the world intercourse bound up with communism. Yes, but here's another issue that you're not getting at, which actually leaves an open door for Marx even not having contradicted himself, and this very passage not having contradicted Stalin. You want to hear it?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
You didn't finish the sentence. Marx said this presupposes the universal development of the productive forces and the world intercourse bound up with communism. What's the kicker?
What? The translation I have is which presupposes the universal development of the productive force in the global economy, which goes along with that.
That's fine. It's the same shit.
Yeah.
It's the same shit as regards to this point.
The other part of this, too, is...
Shut the fuck up! I'm pinning you down here. This is the kicker. The kicker is, there was no universal development of the productive forces, and that very enigma, that very problem is why they no longer believed it was only going to happen in Western Europe. Because the universal development of the forces of production didn't happen. You had a situation of uneven development. This is the very source of the whole fucking problem.
What also didn't happen? Communism. It didn't. Like if you look at
how does Marx define communism?
Well, we covered that at the beginning, right?
No, we didn't cover it, actually. I don't think you know what the fuck you're talking about. I think you're assuming that Marx thought communism was the same thing as some kind of hypothetical communist society, which is not true. Marx appreciated communism as a real and objective force in history, which in no way is the equivalent to some kind of end goal society.
So you don't view that as you don't view his view of communism as the complete victory of communism?
Of course, it's undialectical. There's never a so-called complete victory. This is the problem of people who try to be Marxoids but don't understand the philosophical foundations that gave rise to Marxism. This is literally the problem.
Oh, that's certainly an interpretation, but...
Can you make an argument in debate instead of saying that's certainly an interpretation? Because I'm here to argue who's right and who's fucking wrong. And so far, you're fucking wrong, as far as this debate's concerned.
A fairly subjective reading of it, so...
It's not a subjective reading. We're arguing about the fucking reading itself. Right. You're saying Stalin contradicted Marx and Engels and revised Marx and Engels. I'm contesting that point. They didn't revise the doctrine of Marxism.
I think he did
whatsoever.
He did, which is why in 1924 he writes On the Foundations of Leninism, which has parts supporting this broader international revolutionary action, where he's talking about the efforts of one country, like particularly a peasant country as Russia, are insufficient for that. The efforts of the proletariat of several advanced countries are necessary. And then, as he's trying to argue this policy prescription that he has for these socialism in one country policies, he changes and he's kind of retracts on Foundations of Leninism, and instead...
Where does he retract?
No. He retracts it by releasing then the problems of Leninism to bolster his own policy prescriptions.
Where does he retract?
The releasing of the problems of Leninism after writing On Foundations of Leninism with the collection of his articles that he wrote in...
You're saying when he published it, he took out what he said?
Yes.
Okay. So he didn't publish it, so what is that? So what?
What do you mean he didn't publish it?
He didn't publish the part where he said it depends on the European countries?
No, he did. That was in On Foundations of Leninism.
So what are we talking about? What did he retract? Give me the part he retracted.
He completely stopped focusing on that part of it. And
where did he retract it?
Oh my God, man. When he wrote The Problems of Leninism.
Can you show me where he retracted it in The Problems of Leninism?
Yeah. Hold on. Section 4, the question of the victory of socialism in one country. It's pretty fucking long,
Section
though.
4, question of the question of victory of socialism in one country.
Yeah.
The question of socialism in one... Okay, concerning questions of Leninism is the part. Victory of socialism in one country.
Yeah, I don't know why I said the problems of Leninism. I haven't looked at this shit in a minute.
Question of the victory of socialism in one country. Here we go. So he quotes the pamphlet. So where's the retraction so we can speed this up?
Right underneath that, he then says, but the pamphlet, The Foundation of Leninism, contains a second formulation which says,
this second formulation was directed against the assertions of the critics of Leninism against the Trotskyists, who declared that the dictatorship of the proletariat in one country, in the absence of other countries, could not hold out in the face of conservative Europe. To that extent, but only to that extent, this formulation was then adequate, and undoubtedly it was of some service. Subsequently, when the criticism of Leninism in the sphere had already been overcome in the party, when a new question had come to the fore, the question of the possibility of building a complete socialist society by the efforts of our country, without the help from abroad, the second formulation became obviously inadequate and therefore incorrect. Right. So is that the same as retracting it?
I believe it is, yes.
No, it's not, because he's saying at the time and in context it was true, but new conditions have arisen which render it inadequate to describe the current conditions.
The entire 24 to 26 debate was about recontextualizing Lenin to make it appear to the Communist Party establishment that
stop acting like Lenin didn't fucking end it with an open-ended question, which was, what if the fundamental prerequisites of civilization can be built in a way different from Europe? That's what Lenin said. He posed the question because he himself didn't know, clearly implying that it was an open question. So stop assuming that it was a dogma of Lenin's that the victory of socialism in one country was going to depend on Western Europe, because it was not.
I'm not. I'm talking about historical context. I'm just talking about the debates between 24 and 26. I haven't made any statement.
Yes, because it was against the assertions of, as Stalin himself put it, it was against the assertions of the critics of Lenin and against Trotskyists, who declared that the dictatorship of the proletariat in one country, in the absence of victory in other countries, could not hold out in the face of conservative Europe. And it was adequate at that time.
So given the history of the USSR and where it ended up, do you think that that was true?
You're making such an Olympic leap, though, because
oh, no, I know that
the USSR lasted for 70 years. You really want me to encompass every fucking chapter of the USSR's history beyond this point? The significance and contribution of Stalin was immortal. It lasted beyond the USSR's own existence. Clearly, that's not where the history is ultimately going to be judged. So stop talking about in 1991 the USSR dissolved. Okay, what does that have to do with this specific dispute, though? Because why? Listen, you really think the Soviet Union dissolved because Stalin was wrong about this? Why did it dissolve in 91 then? Why does China still survive? That's so fucking stupid.
China's weird. China's
weird. Okay, what you were saying is stupid. If Stalin was wrong, he would have been wrong way earlier than he was.
Now who's putting a time frame on it?
I am putting a time frame on this. What's wrong with that? I am putting the issue with putting a time frame in the context of Marx and Engels' words is because they never fucking said or even implied a time frame.
I think
I am implying a time frame. I'm even explicitly stating a time frame. 70 fucking years is too long to judge the significance of who was correct in the disputes of the Soviet Union. Oh, yeah. Where's the Soviet Union now? What a stupid thing to say.
I
What a
don't think it's that
stupid
long.
thing to say. Why don't you just ask?
70 years is not that long.
Yes, it is really fucking long. It's almost a
70
whole
years is as
fucking
long as one
century.
person lives.
Listen, too much passed between the time Stalin wrote this and the collapse of the USSR to pin it down to Stalin. You fucking moron.
I'm not pinning it down to Stalin. And
yes,
again,
you are. Do you know about Khrushchev's secret speech?
Yeah, and I know about the fucking Khrushchev fucking stagnation too. Like, come on, man.
Yes,
this is not
there's a lot of things. What about Gorbachev's reforms?
And I know, and then I also know about the fucking.
So this proves the possibility of so in your view, despite all of these real details that were decisive, the actual problem is that generally socialism, this is what it all comes down to, is that you can't build socialism in one country. That's how you're going to simplify it?
Yes, I do simplify it like that, but that's only simplification for the purpose of stating the point. It's not like I would sit here and be like, the fall of the USSR was a straight line from socialism.
I can't believe we have such a fucking weasel here. I can't believe we have such a fucking weasel. You're the second biggest fucking weasel to ever come on my fucking show. I asked you a direct question, so this is your example. Well, not exactly. No, that's what you're saying. You're saying the USSR collapsed because Stalin was wrong about socialism in one country. But guess what?
Not because he was wrong about socialism in one country, but because Trotsky was. It's not about anybody. It did not collapse because of any one person being wrong, but the criticisms of socialism in one country during the 20th.
You think they were affirmed by the Soviet Union's collapse in 91?
I think they were affirmed.
But the Soviet Union achieved too much before that collapse and had cemented its actual world historical significance too much and too thoroughly for you to say that 91 is going to decide who was right in those debates during the 20s. That's the issue.
If I had to pick a year, I would probably say maybe 85 when they started losing hold on the Eastern European countries. But regardless,
listen, the Soviet Union built a real society that fed and clothed and in which hundreds of millions of people lived inside of.
And that never stopped getting fucked with by the imperialist West.
What's your point?
So the entire...
the West is not to blame for the Soviet Union's collapse whatsoever. The West is a non-factor in the Soviet Union's collapse. A complete non-factor.
You don't think that Reagan's fucking...
no, I don't fucking think Reagan was fucking relevant. It was all internal to world communism. Everything was internal. The West was a non-factor. The West was an issue since the beginning. You think that was new? No, it wasn't. The new thing were the disputes happening internally in the world of communism. The new thing was the Sino-Soviet split, for example. The new thing were the disputes going on within China about the fate of socialism. The new thing was Khrushchev's denunciation of Stalin. The new thing was the inability for socialism in the USSR to acquire a reinvigoration like it did in China through a cultural revolution. Those were the new things that were fucking happening. Those were the reasons, you know what, was it the West that forced Gorbachev to fucking cave in and so-called make the fucking political mistake and the disastrous mistake of politically liberalizing the country? Did the West force him to do that? No, it fucking didn't. The West is a non-factor in the Soviet Union's collapse. If anything, I'll say America. I don't think America even foresaw the extent of that collapse. America itself was surprised by it. America was like, what? I mean, it put America in a situation of unprecedented uncertainty about the future. Even America was a little bit spooked by it. So no, the West was not to blame for the Soviet Union's collapse. Not at all.
So the tariffs on oil that Reagan put out in the 80s that caused such major economic issues that you lead to the point where
they only aggravated the issue that was already in place. Why did the Soviet Union have to become so reliant upon oil in the first place?
Because you realize having a global marketplace, which goes back to what
because the Soviet Union was not always an oil rentier state. The Soviet Union used to have domestic industry that it exported. It didn't rely on oil like a rentier state. It was only in the Brezhnev era that this had to happen. It became an oil rentier state like Saudi Arabia.
All right. So why did it stagnate from the 60s to the 60s to the 70s?
Because the primary stage of socialization and what, if you want to call it, primitive accumulation, industrialization, was pretty much accomplished fully. And the question was, what's the next step? What's the next stage? And this was an open question. It was a blind alley. China responded to this in its own way. The USSR had to gripe with attempting to respond in it in its own way, and it obviously failed to respond. But it's not just a matter of a failure of policy. We're talking about an existential and generational crisis. The essence of not only Marxism, Leninism, but communism and socialism in general had to be rediscovered in a new way, just like how it was in China during the Cultural Revolution. And that didn't happen in the Soviet Union.
So given that collapse of the Soviet economy, or stagnation into collapse.
But you're just saying, oh, well, the whole thing was doomed because in the 20s, those guys turned out to be right. But that doesn't exhaust the detail of what actually happened. There was more details to it than that.
I just said it's not a straight line, man.
No, but you're pussyfooting around because you're too much of a pussy to own up to how stupid your position is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So without taking advantage of the Western imperialist states going through the Great Depression from 29 to 41.
What do you mean take advantage?
Oh, take advantage in the sense that they had 100,000 different immigrants from Western capitalist countries come in, and they had Ford setting up fucking factories and stuff.
So
they were
no.
Oh no, this is not any sort of I'm not saying it in a bad way. I'm asking hypothetically, had they not had this stroke of luck of these Western countries sort of
It wasn't a stroke of luck. There's no such thing as a stroke of luck. The same factors that gave rise to the Great Depression gave rise to the October Revolution. Everything was interconnected. There's no luck. So your cope here is that the Soviet Union merely got lucky. Even though Marxists had at this time always been predicting a worldwide breakdown of capitalist production and worldwide capitalist crisis, which was vindicated in the 29 collapse in the stock market crash. That was just a stroke of luck, right?
That's not any more vindicated than the fucking fall of the USSR is vindicating Trotsky.
But it's what do you mean? I'm saying it's not a stroke of luck. I'm not saying the collapse of the USSR was a stroke of luck, but I'm saying it doesn't vindicate Trotsky, but it doesn't mean it was a stroke of luck.
What I'm saying is that they got lucky in the sense that they did not directly have a hand in the causes or like
of the Great Depression. So according to you, had the Great Depression not happened, capitalists would not have taken the opportunity to invest in the USSR's industry?
I think it would have been less likely, yeah.
No, you have no evidence for that.
Well, that's why I said I think.
You're just coping.
That's not a cope. This was just
okay. So the reason why was they got lucky because the Great Depression happened, and this, for some mysterious reason, this incentivized companies and Ford to go help industrialize. Even though Russia's a very resource-rich country, which the world was interested in objectively, because the world is interested in profit, regardless of whether there's a depression or not. According to you, it's only because of the Great Depression.
I didn't say it was only because of that, but also when Bukharin was talking about this, when he was talking about socialism in one country, and he was talking about fucking essentially an autarchical economic development system, he was making the argument that they would be able to pay for all this with fucking surplus grain and progressive taxes. Okay, they didn't expect any sort of influx of capital from the Western capitalist states like they ended up getting as a result of the Great Depression. It was,
so what?
Like I said, a stroke of luck. There was a huge problem with the.
So wait. You're saying that Bukharin was so you're saying the capitalists gave the USSR a bunch of free shit?
I never said it was free.
So what the fuck is your point?
What do you think Trotsky's point was?
Trotsky's fucking plan was to turn the USSR into a fascist dictatorship where he was going to enslave the peasant majority and turn the USSR into a war machine.
Let me rephrase. What do you think Trotsky's plan was with global trade?
What was it?
Well, he was very much talking about continuing some of the NEP shit and having these open trade channels and using technology.
At what year? What year was he tagged? Because Trotsky's plan was super industrialization, even more hardcore than the biggest Stalinist collectivization plan.
Right, but it wasn't industrializing specifically with indigenous technology and capital, where Bukharin's was, and he just thought we could just increase production on the shit that we already have.
Okay.
Right, so this influx of capital and technology from the West is really, again, I'm not a Trotskyist, but this is essentially what Trotsky's plan was from the start. Ignoring all the fascist shit, I'm talking.
So Bukharin thought that all of the industry was going to be built from Russia alone. It was going to all be Russian technology.
That was the argument that they were making these debates. It was that
Do you have
they
a
could industrialize
citation?
with indigenous technology and capital. Yeah, I can go
Citation?
find one. Yeah, I can go find one.
Indigenous technology. Interesting word.
Yeah.
Okay, please cite.
Yeah, give me a minute. And then there was also the Stalin thought he was just going to get all this money from the fucking treasury, which is not how it works.
So Stalin didn't believe that.
No. Stalin and Bukharin were not on the same page about that at all.
Okay. So what was the point you're trying to make?
That Trotsky was the one that was essentially advocating for
But Bukharin did not agree with. Sorry, Stalin didn't agree with Bukharin. Why are you bringing Trotsky into it?
Well, Stalin didn't agree with Bukharin, but Stalin also didn't agree with Trotsky. There's multiple viewpoints on this.
So Stalin said they were going to tap into the foreign treasuries.
No. He said they were going to tap into their own state treasury.
Their own state treasuries to buy foreign technology.
Deficit spending.
To buy foreign technology.
No. Not to buy foreign technology. To try to push industrialization in the USSR with their own indigenous technology that they already
So
had.
you give me the citation for indigenous technology.
Yeah, give me a minute. It'll probably take a minute.
So, and according to you, most of the technology the USSR employed during its industrialization was not indigenous. Hello?
Yeah, sorry, I'm looking up something. Give me a sec.
Did you answer the question?
Hey, man, you. What did you say earlier when I tried to ask you something when you were looking up something? Give me a minute. Do you have JSTOR? Like a JSTOR account?
I can access whatever you need.
Okay, give me a sec.
Did you send it? Have you sent it?
I'm still looking up. Give me a sec. I found Stalin talking about it, but I haven't found Bukharin talking about it. What Stalin said was, from a country which imports machines and equipment into a country which produces machines and equipment in this manner, the USSR will become a self-sufficient economic.
Can you please link it to me? I can't fucking listen or hear anything you're saying. Let me read it myself.
Okay.
By the way, you were wrong about the Stalin quote. I'm going to read to give more context.
Which one?
The defect in the formulation, or what renders it inadequate, that he identifies is that it joins two different questions into one. It joins the question of the possibility of building socialism by the efforts of one country, which must be answered in the affirmative, with the question of whether a country in which the dictatorship of the proletariat exists can consider itself fully guaranteed against interventions and consequently against the restoration of the old order, without a victorious revolution in a number of other countries, which must be answered in the negative. This is apart from the fact that this formulation may give occasion for things. So you see, the only way to guarantee that the proletariat can exist against intervention is through the revolutions in the other countries in question. But that doesn't mean it's impossible to build socialism in one country.
I guess it depends on how long you want it to last, right?
Did you not listen to what I said?
I heard you.
It's about the question of the guarantee of foreign aggression.
Right. So what do you think is more effective against foreign aggression? A bulwark of like-minded states, or looking inward and over-militarizing to the detriment of your food and industrial production?
What the fuck are you talking about?
Okay, so
What are you
again,
talking about? Stalin literally just said, despite the revolutions not spreading, it is a possibility to build socialism by the efforts of one country.
yeah,
Just because it would be easier.
Nobody ever fucking argued that.
If it's fucking easier for other countries to be socialist with you, that's fine. But if that's not in the realm of your fucking choice, it's not relevant, you fucking idiot. You're acting like you said, oh, which one would be better? They don't have a fucking choice, you idiot.
Again, I guess that depends on. Again,
That depends on. You never take a fucking position. And link me the fucking JSTOR or whatever, by the way. You never take a fucking position. You always weasel like, well, it depends on your. You just take a fucking position and debate about it like a fucking man.
Buddy, this isn't that serious.
Yeah, it is serious.
It's really not.
Yeah, because you're a dumbass. That's why. You're a fucking fake Marxist, Marxoid, doesn't understand the actual philosophical foundations of Marxism, so you run your mouth saying all sorts of dumb, stupid shit about history and about Marxism, making an embarrassment of yourself.
Okay.
Well, it depends on your interpretation. That's not how you were arguing with Alex. You weren't saying depends on your... You were making solid, affirmative statement, dogmatic statements with Alex. I saw what you were talking with Alex.
Yeah.
But now you don't want to grow a spine and actually defend the position.
I've given the position. I, again, think
But you've never defended it. You've never defended it. You've never been able to defend that.
Engels said 1 year before his death that it's...
You have not established that that is part of the doctrine of Marxism.
I guess it depends on whether or not...
Yes, it depends on. Yes, it depends on. Yes, it depends on. Yes, it depends on. Yes, you're just like that guy yesterday. You're literally an NPC. I guess it depends on. Guess it depends on.
So something that they wrote explicitly, like 2 months before they died, is not.
No, it's a circumstantial statement about the current situation. In no way is that the essential doctrine of Marxism. Not everything Marx and Engels wrote is the doctrine of Marxism. Clearly, it couldn't be because they changed their fucking understanding of the events as they were unfolding through the passage of time. So no, not everything they wrote is the whole. This is literally what Stalin described as Talmudistic dogmatism, which is incompatible with the very dialectic view of Marx and Engels themselves. They themselves were able to fucking shift their view while being consistent to their essential foundation. You're just assuming that essential foundation is some kind of body of dead text, which is fucking incompatible with Marxism. Marx and Engels literally were explicitly clear that the essence of the correct position cannot be contained in ossified doctrine or dead text or sentences or phrases. And they literally ad verbatim say this shit. You're literally betraying the very fucking spirit of Engels and Marx and using their words against the living fucking content.
Using their words against people that are taking positions.
No, you're using the words of Marx and Engels against the very living essence of what Marx and Engels were drawing as their foundation for those same fucking words. That's the fucking difference.
So then we circle back to Lenin's view on revisionism, and if that's your take that it's a living doctrine, then any form of revisionism to it.
No, it's not. I just fucking told you. You can contradict. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. I already explained to you that you can contradict the living essence of Marxism, and that is revisionism. That is not the same fucking thing as having a new perspective or new position compared to Engels and Marx based on changing time and circumstance. You don't know how, you're opportunistically identifying the latter with revisionism, but that is not how Lenin used and levied the charge of revisionism against Kautsky. If Lenin thought that was revisionism, why did Lenin write Imperialism the Highest Stage? Because Lenin wasn't smart enough to recognize his own revisionism? You're such an idiot. Like, Lenin would have been the biggest revisionist then. Lenin's strategy within Russia, Marx and Engels didn't say a word about it. Lenin showed an example of how this was in line with Marx's view. For example, Marx's view about the situation in France and how Marx was by no means dogmatic. The dogmatism about the advanced proletariat, that was coming from social democracy. Marx was very dynamic and very open-minded and open-ended about concrete situations according to different countries. Marx thought that a true people's revolution can happen in France through an alliance between the indebted peasantry and the proletariat. Lenin drew from that as an example of the fluidity with which Marx was able to acquire concrete analysis of concrete circumstances against the dogmatists. But otherwise, Lenin would have been considered the biggest revisionist. Because, yeah, you'll probably find a passage of Marx and Engels which on face value seems to contradict what Lenin will say. Does that mean Lenin's a revisionist?
Yes, but that's not a problem. I think that's the problem here, is that you think that
No, but you are opportunistically abusing the word revisionism. Because, okay, if you want to call revisionism any fucking apparent formal disagreement with Marx or Engels, that's fine. But what Lenin means by revisionism is much more specific.
Okay, so then based on the first definition, then yes, socialism in one country is revisionism of Marx and Engels, but it's not necessarily.
But Marx and Engels themselves were the biggest.
It's not necessarily a revision of Marxism as a living doctrine.
And Marx and Engels themselves were revisionists with regard to their own position too.
I never said that they weren't.
Okay, good. So everyone's revisionist. No one can actually not be a revisionist.
If they weren't revisionists, then you wouldn't have to make the distinction between Marxist-Leninist and Marxist, or fucking Leninism and Stalinism.
Marxists are also revisionists. Everyone's a revisionist. You're a revisionist. I'm a revisionist. He's a revisionist. She's a revisionist. If everyone's a revisionist, why even levy the charge of revisionism since everyone's a revisionist?
I don't think everybody's revisionist.
Who's not a revisionist?
People that take what Marx wrote as doctrine.
Who?
What do you mean, who?
But taking what Marx wrote as doctrine is revisionism because it contradicts what Marx himself writes about dogmatic doctrinaire positions. Now, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't, because you're not talking about...
Yes, it does. Marx and Engels were very clear that dogmatic doctrinaire positions are incompatible with the dialectic perspective. So if someone is taking a dogmatic view in relation to Marx's writings, actually they are revisionist because it contradicts the express written words of Marxism. There is no way to not be a revisionist according to you.
If that's your take, then
no, it's your take. It is the logical conclusion of your take.
The logical conclusion of your take is that any change to what is written is not revisionism. It's part of it being a living doctrine, right?
Which is the actual fucking Marxist view, yes.
Okay, so then really just any change can be made, and Kautsky was right.
No, that's not true, because Lenin means something more specific when he charges Kautsky with revisionism than that. You fucking idiot! Kautsky's fucking crime is not only doing that! You fucking Marxoid dipshit fucking idiot! You fucking type so much in my Discord, and you're such an airheaded fucking moron. Don't you, what part of the fact that Lenin was levying the charge against Kautsky, not simply, changing us wording, having different position based on different circumstances, but a fundamental betrayal of the essence, the living essence of Marxism. Do you not fucking speak English or something?
Do you not think that socialism in one country is a fundamental part of what Stalin considered to be socialism and communism going forward from the time that...
And in no way does it betray the living essence of what Marxism is. As a matter of fact, it is because it is perfectly compatible, not only perfectly compatible, but perfectly an expression of a living dialectical materialist view. It is literally the logical conclusion of Marxism, given the circumstances. There is a perfect line of continuity from Marx to Mao. It is so perfectly clear how one leads to another based on the essence of what Marxism is.
You can make one for fucking Trotsky too. It doesn't mean that it's...
No, you can't, because Trotsky's permanent revolution was literally an anarchistic fucking betrayal of... It was not dialectical. It was a one-sided anarchistic permanent negation. There's no negation of the negation with Trotsky. That's the issue.
So you don't think any of Kamenev's stuff was revisionist either, even though he was arguing against Stalin? Because you could draw a straight line from that shit too.
No, you can't. Stalin represented the straight line. Stalin was the straight line. Stalin alone...
you believe that.
Stalin alone is the person who had the balls to take Lenin to his conclusion and not step backwards like Kamenev, Bukharin, Zinoviev, and Trotsky and the rest of them were doing. Only Stalin was faithful enough to Lenin to take it to its furthest and most logical conclusion.
Well,
the rest of them were bogged down by prejudices from Western social democratic Marxism that Lenin overcame.
Didn't have any prejudices? Really?
What?
Is your contention there that Stalin didn't have any prejudices?
Stalin had prejudices of the social democratic Western Marxism relative to Mao, yes, but not relative to them. Relative to Mao, yes, I would make that argument. Stalin did have certain prejudices left over from the era of social democracy,
yes,
that turn out not to be necessary conclusions of Marx's original insight at all. And I think Mao demonstrated that.
Well, where we disagree then, I guess, is that
we're not here to talk about our disagreement. We're actually here to debate about who's right and who's fucking idiot.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered that. So.
No, we haven't, because you haven't made any arguments.
I mean, if that's the way you feel, that's fine.
Chat, did he make arguments? Did he respond to my arguments? Or did he just say, well, depending on how you interpret it? You haven't fucking regained your honor. And you want to debate Alex?
Yeah, I don't give a shit. Not right now, though.
You want to debate Alex?
Yeah, we can do that later. I'm not doing it right now. I've been talking.
Why not right now?
Because I've been talking to you for, like 2 fucking hours, dude.
From a country which imports machines and equipment into a country which produces machines in this manner. Okay, wait. So Stalin is saying first we will import machines and equipment and then they're going to produce their own? Well, that's what fucking happened.
He was talking about what they were before. He wasn't talking about... He was... In the context of that quote, he was talking about what they were prior to his... like desired implementation of...
But they did eventually produce their own machines and equipment. They did eventually do that.
I agree.
Okay, so what was the point of this quote?
We were talking about internalization, I believe, at this time, and we were talking about using indigenous technology as the phrase that was... But
you haven't proven that what Stalin meant was that producing... Like, they did eventually start producing their own technology and indigenous technology. That is what happened.
Can you demonstrate that I didn't prove it?
Yes, I can, because what you were trying to prove was that Stalin was saying we're going to immediately stop importing machines and we're going to immediately build our own indigenously, and that's how we're going to solve the crisis. That's not what happened.
That was Bukharin, but I can't find it right now, man.
Bukharin himself didn't even say that. No one thought they were going to immediately stop importing machines and equipment from other countries.
Now we're back on time frame. So immediately is sort of like talking about eternally when we're talking about permanence of a socialism.
Yeah, you seem to have this issue with scales of time. You seem to have this dogmatic assumption that if Stalin says socialism is possible in one country, that means it is eternally possible in one country, which he never said.
I think Lenin was a lot clearer about it being a transient state than Stalin was. Stalin was specifically positing it in these debates.
What do you mean transient state?
Well, again, when he was talking about this, a lot of it was coming up in the context of we're going to collapse if we don't get help from the winners of the proletariat.
And when they didn't get that help, what did Lenin say?
But again, this is...
They didn't get the help, so what did Lenin say?
I'm not saying that was Lenin's final position. I'm saying in
Maybe,
contrast.
maybe Lenin himself didn't know the full implications of his own fucking break with social democracy,
Maybe.
which social democracy and its Western prejudices gave rise to the shocking and cataclysmic betrayal that gave rise to Lenin's rejection and split with the Second International. So there was a lot of shit from social democracy that they were inheriting that
Right.
was part of that same corruption.
That's fair. Yeah. Yeah, I can agree on that. That's fine. What I was pointing out though is that when we're talking about time frames, there were times when somebody was specific about time frames.
But this wasn't an
When
example
someone
of
was not.
that. The quote you just sent me is not an example of that.
No, I'm not talking about the quote anymore, man. I'm talking about Lenin, but it's whatever. All right, dude. It's been fun. It's been over an hour. I got stuff to do, so I appreciate you taking the time. Honestly,
Okay, you have to debate Alex next.
I don't have to do shit, but I will. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, man. Take care.